I don't know about you, but I only trust the best. So if you're looking at getting your roof checked out, redone, these are the guys that can help you. Belter Roofing and Construction, they are the best. They'll come out, do a free inspection. You can trust them with your roof. Call them, Belter Roofing and Construction. 405-952-7777. That's Belter Roofing and Construction.
This is the Jake for the State podcast, and this is the call for every red-blooded, God-fearing, liberty-loving patriot to prepare yourself, take your position, stand your ground, and advance the cause of freedom. Let's go.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Jake for the State podcast. And we cover, obviously, all things Oklahoma. We're in the last few remaining weeks of legislative session here in Oklahoma, so it will conclude at the end of May. And we have with us Representative Sherrie Conley to talk about what's happening up at the Capitol, what legislation we're looking at concerning specifically those bills dealing with public education. And then we're going to talk a little bit about reading in general, the general approach to reading and how reading is dealt with here in the state of Oklahoma. So welcome to the show, Representative.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm excellent. Well, you guys have been busy up at the Capitol, obviously, and we've been hearing about the realm of public education continually. Of course, Ryan Walters being our state superintendent, he has kind of a national spotlight on him with all the things that he's doing and pushing and working on, and all of the extreme supporters and the extreme haters that that are either loving him or hating him in the state of Oklahoma. But obviously, the realm of public education is getting a lot of attention. You being a former school teacher and a current teacher in higher education now, you are well-versed in what's happening in education here in Oklahoma. So let's just start with what you've seen this legislative session and what bills are remaining dealing with education here in Oklahoma.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Probably the most disappointing bill this session in regards to education has been the science of reading bill that was introduced in the Senate. Senator Pugh brought it forward. He and I spent some time in Seattle last summer, and he was there. They started talking about the science of reading. I reached out to him and said, hey, I've been working on this since 2021, and, have tried to get this across the line. And, if you are interested, I would love to help you work on this. And so he worked with some other people outside the Capitol and getting some language put together for both for Common Ed and then also for higher ed, trying to get the colleges of education to teach the science of reading at the higher ed level. And 1906, which was the Common Ed piece, made it through the Senate. I don't believe it made it through the House. I don't believe the higher ed piece made it through the Senate. I haven't checked on either one of those as far as that goes, which one made it, how far. But I know 1906 came over to the House and then didn't get a hearing. I believe that there was some talk about it, or maybe it did get heard in A and B because there's some money attached to it, but didn't get any further than that. And so I believe they had some problems with the language of the higher ed piece. Like I said, I think there's some pushback at that level to be instructing teachers on that. There's that controversy that you have been studying, the difference between the 3 cueing and the guided reading versus the science of reading. And we just can't seem to get that across in the state of Oklahoma. So that is probably the most disappointing for me this year, something that wasn't actually my legislation.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, and to really get all of the listeners up to speed concerning the science of reading in general. I mean, we could cover obviously 12 podcasts talking about all that entails, but this 3 cueing and guided reading, I want to circle back to that because I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about it.
Okay.
Currently, what bills are before you in the House pertaining to the Department of Ed or public education?
Yeah, so we've got the rules that are coming through the Administrative Rules Committee. I believe that there's going to be some conversation today in caucus about those. There's been some pushback for them, and there's multiple rules that the Department of Education has been putting through dealing with pedophiles in schools. I think there's some accreditation issues that are going on there, trying to attach outcomes, school outcomes to accreditation, and some other key issues attaching those to accreditation. And I'm trying to think. There's a couple of others. There's several of them. I think there's like 12.
Yeah,
I'm not on that committee,
right.
so
That's
it's
what I
not
was
something that
thinking.
I've studied. Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of this controversy around the rules is not so much about the rules themselves, the content that they cover, but the process and the jurisdiction, if you will, of the board, and if they themselves can enforce rules, or does it have to go through the check and balance of the legislature? Is that part of the conversation?
Yeah, I believe it is. I had a conversation with a couple of members from the committee, and they said, we had some questions on them. We reached out to OSDE. They clarified the questions that we had, and so we don't really have any problem with the rules that are coming through. And so what ends up happening is the people who don't want the rules, they end up attacking, like you said, the process. They come through and say, well, there's nowhere where it says that the OSDE has the right to put these rules forward, because it's not necessarily attached to legislation, because it doesn't say that the OSDE shall promulgate the rules. And so if they don't see that wording, they don't believe that there's any right for the State Department to put their input in there. But I believe that we've determined that they actually do have that right to be able to spell that out to schools, to say, this is what the intent of the legislature is, and this is what this looks like for schools through the OSDE, and what we're going to hold you all accountable for. And that's the way they try to kill them.
Just talking about the ability to promulgate rules and whether that falls to the Department of Education, or you said if legislators don't see that specific language in the statutes, then they conclude that Department of Ed does not have the right and the ability to put forth rules and enforce them. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah, that's what they try to say, but I believe that they determined last year, when there was a question about some of the rules, they tried to say that wasn't the case, but I think we determined that it is the case, that the State Department can actually say, here are some rules surrounding this legislation and how that's going to look in the rollout for districts.
Okay. Now, where did we end up with? Because I know there was a bill to add members to the Board of Education. Is that bill still alive, or was that killed?
Yeah, I have not seen that, so I believe that it was killed. I think. Let me think. There's been so much coming at us. We've been so busy. I'm trying to remember. I don't think that it ended up coming back to the floor with some changes.
Okay.
I think that I think the Senate changed it some, and it came back. There was some pushback on members, and I believe that the bill actually died, or it may be sitting there with Senate amendments and waiting to come to the floor to accept those.
Okay. We know that
could be a possibility.
The admin rules are pretty much the main focus right now in the Department of Ed and in this realm of education. So let's shift just a minute here to reading and the science of reading. So I recently listened to several podcasts that you sent me that I found fascinating. Educated me a lot on the last, I don't know how many years, is it 20 years, 30 years that they've really been taking a deep dive into this science of reading?
Yeah, well, it's been, I don't remember what the date was. I know in the 1980s is when they started pushing for the three cueing. It actually started 20 years before, but it didn't really start catching on until the 80s. And so before that time, we were actually using phonics. It just wasn't called the science of reading at the time. And so then whenever the three cueing came out and they started pushing that into schools, then in the late 90s, I believe, is when the science of reading started making a resurgence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I had never thought about this, and I guess either I had teachers that, well, I don't know how they taught me. I don't know how I learned to read. I know my mom spent a lot of time reading to us and working with us at home. And I remember that reading always came pretty naturally. And I attribute that mainly to my mom and the work we spent at home reading books, even before I entered school. And so I think that set a good foundation. I think it's a big part of this whole conversation to be had as well. But this idea of phonics versus three cueing. And so let's just explain both of those real quickly. I think phonics is maybe self-explanatory, but go ahead and explain what we mean by phonics.
Yeah. So with phonics, you actually learn the sounds of the letters of the alphabet, and then you learn the blends and the digraphs and all of that. There's a whole jargon of language that goes along with phonics, but phonemic awareness is understanding, like those little cues that you got in school where it said when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. That's part of phonics. That's understanding what the letters do, how they change when they come together as a blend, or how they sound out differently, how you can have a long O and a short O, and long versus short. That's basically what phonics and the phonemic awareness is.
So it's essentially just understanding letters and the sounds they make, and the sounds they make when they're combined with other letters, and sounding them out. And so if a child learning to read comes across a word, then they go back to their phonics. They start to sound it out. And this is kind of set in opposition to a contrast with three cueing. So what is three cueing?
Okay, so three cueing is where you come to a word that you don't know what it is. Rather than sounding it out like what you would do with phonics, you look at the pictures, see what's going on in the story, and think about what that word might be. And so, like, let's say that the word is horse, and the child looks at the picture and there's a horse in the picture, but they think pony. And they might change that word to pony rather than horse. It doesn't change necessarily the meaning of the text. It's just not the right word. I mean, if they would say pony when it's horse, and obviously the word starts with an H, that would show that they have no idea how to sound that word out and have no idea what that word is. And so that's just the basic idea, just trying to figure out, well, what do you think the word is, and does it make sense?
Right. So they're asking the child to kind of look at the context of the sentence, what it's already talking about, and then to look at like the picture, right? To look at the illustration, and then what? So you have those two. Am I missing a cue? There's three cues,
Yeah.
right? That they're supposed to look
Yeah.
for.
Does it make sense?
Doesn't make sense. Okay. So those three cues: the context, the illustration, and does it make sense? And so essentially, they're asked to guess, right? Based on all of those different cues, what do you think the word is? Rather than the way I was taught, and I think so many people, is sound it out to learn how to actually read. And it's amazing that this was introduced as a whole new way to teach kids how to read. And it was really, I guess, promoted as something rooted in science, that's saying this is how the brain works. Am I saying that right? This is how the brain works, and that this is the way that we are supposed to learn how to read?
Mm-hmm. That's the way it was presented. And if you listen to the creators and the people who actually endorse this way of learning to read, they say it's easier. And they even say that it's easier for the teacher. And so that right there, whenever I heard somebody say it's easier for the teacher, I thought, okay, that right there is the problem, is that if you are changing something because it's easier for the teacher and not easier for the child to learn, I mean, we have seen our reading scores plummet. And it's because we switched from teaching children root words, base words, prefixes, suffixes, and just sounds in general. We have cheated our children, millions of children actually, out of being excellent readers because of it.
So this was introduced, like you were saying, was it early 90s?
So it was in the 80s that it
Okay.
actually caught on. It was started, developed in the 60s, but didn't catch on really until the 80s. And, I've got two kids. One of them is 31. The other one is 26. My 31-year-old learned how to read with phonics, and my 26-year-old did not. So being a teacher, I was not a pre-emergent or an emergent reader teacher. I taught fifth grade math and social studies. So when they came to me, they already knew how to read. But you could definitely tell one of the big things that you do in science and social studies is you do round reading, where you go around the room and the kids each take a section of the text and read it, and you could tell the kids that had struggled learning how to read and the ones that were doing very well. And I know you heard in the podcast the difference between the third grader who had not learned to read using phonics, and then that first grader who was reading that text that some adults might struggle reading, actually. And so you can tell the difference when they have not been taught how to sound words out.
Yeah, no doubt. And so this was, I believe Bill Clinton was part of the support for this, the 3Qing, correct? That his administration got behind this, that it was rooted in science. And then we saw a shift with George W. Bush and that administration saying, no, we're going to come back to phonics. And there was a shift back to this original way of teaching reading. So how was this received? Were you teaching at the time of Clinton and Bush and during these changes of administration and changes of emphasis?
Yeah, I was not teaching when Clinton was in office. I was teaching when Bush was in office. Well, in the 90s. I started I guess I was in the classroom when Clinton was in office. It was going back to the 80s. That was
Those
Reagan,
years.
right?
No, right?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'm trying to suppress those times. Just kidding.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, I remember being in the schools, and like I said, I taught fifth grade, so I didn't actually have to, teach phonics. But I remember being a reading teacher, a fifth grade reading teacher, and having the curriculum, and the kids hated it. And, there were some principals that I worked for that were like, you know what, do whatever you want to in your classroom, as long as the kids are reading and they're, learning math, you just do what you want to do, as long as you're teaching the standards. And I loved that, because those books, that the curriculum that the schools purchase are just horrible. The stories are awful. The kids hate them. When you say, okay, take out your reader, the kids are like, oh. And so I started teaching using novels, because, I could teach the same thing through the novels and, really engage the students. And a lot of the, what ended up happening was, whenever the science of reading came up and there was starting to be some pushback, then they came. What happened was the federal government went to them, because they had all of this grant money that was available through the Bush administration, to say, we're gonna fund the science of reading for you, but you have to be doing phonics. Well, the federal government ended up going to these curriculum companies that were doing the 3Qing and said, you need to change it, or you're not going to be able to get any of this grant money. Well, they refused to change it. But what did they do? They changed their name in order to be able to make it look like they were actually teaching phonics. Well, what ended up happening with some of them was they took the 3Qing and then added portions of phonemic awareness to it, but it wasn't nearly enough. And what they ended up calling it is a blended model or guided reading. And so, it still didn't do what needed to be done. They said, well, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time on phonics, but if you've got a word that the child needs to figure out how, what that word is, then you can teach them, off to the side, teach them a little bit of phonemic awareness. And, a lot of teachers ended up not learning how to do phonics. They ended up not knowing how to teach it, didn't use it.
Which I think is a whole nother conversation of you have kids that aren't learning it, but when you have teachers who don't even know it themselves, I think that's very problematic. So where does the state of Oklahoma stand then? Are we teaching 3Qing or guided reading or the blended model?
Yeah, so currently the college that I teach in, we are actually using phonemic awareness and promoting phonics instruction and the science of reading. I had the opportunity to interview a teacher just recently, and I asked him, so tell me about the science of reading, and he started off on this, kind of this tangent that it made it very obvious that he had no idea what I was talking about. And he's teaching fourth graders. And he's actually in a public school setting right now. So a fourth grade teacher who has taught second, third, fourth, and fifth graders. So he has taught, emerging readers in second grade and had no idea what the science of reading was. And he is currently in the classroom. So
Wow.
That tells me that district is not using the science of reading. They're not using any kind of phonics because he had no idea what that term meant. So I think it depends on what school district you're working in, which tells me that, the colleges are probably not teaching it either. Like the college that I teach at, we teach the science of reading. We talk about the importance of that. We talk about the science, the reading wars. And so they leave our school knowing exactly, they know the difference between, 3Qing and guided reading and the science of reading.
So that brings us kind of full circle back to Senate Bill 1906 and this bill authored by Pew. So what was the purpose of that? We talked about it before, but now that we've kind of brought the listeners up to speed and educated them on 3Qing and phonics, remind us again what Senate Bill 1906 sought to accomplish.
Yeah, well, it just was to put the science of reading out there, make sure that all of the teachers are trained in the science of reading. If you are teaching kindergarten, first and second grade, I believe, I don't remember if it went up to third grade or not, but it is to ensure that any teacher that is in a classroom and they're teaching emerging or pre-emerging readers, that they have training in the science of reading. And then I believe that they added a higher ed piece to that, and requesting that the teachers that come out of the teacher colleges are trained in it. And it didn't get through.
So if they're teaching the science of reading, are they teaching all models and then letting the teacher teach what they prefer? Or is there a mandate to teach a certain way? Are we getting textbooks for our kids in second, third, fourth grade that are going the direction of phonics or going the direction of 3Qing, or is it up to the teacher?
Yeah, well, I think that it's the district that's making the decision.
Okay.
What curriculum that they're going to purchase. Now, 1906 may have a mandate as to what curriculum the schools have to use, and going to, dropping the 3Qing in Oklahoma and going to a strictly teaching the science of reading in our schools. I know that there was some money attached to it, and I think, that was to help get all of our teachers trained in that. But it's very disappointing to me that we can't get that across the line. And I hope that it's not. I hope that our people that are making those decisions are not doing it because of how they feel about Ryan Walters. I hope that it's because they just don't understand and they're not educated as to the difference that the science of reading makes versus the 3Qing and the guided reading plans. I would like to hope that it's because, they just aren't educated in it, and it's not something that they're using as a, to get back at somebody that they don't agree with.
Yeah. Now, is Ryan Walters, has he come out and spoken in favor of a particular direction, whether it be 3Qing or phonics, or has he spoken out about any of those directions?
Yeah, I believe that he has been, pretty vocal about the science of reading. I've heard him talk about, raising reading scores in the state, and that the literacy is very important to him. It would make a huge difference in the state if we would go to that. If you look at Mississippi scores, Mississippi did it several years ago, and they are, in my opinion, they're the model. That if we could do anything, to change our literacy rates, our literacy scores, outcomes, it would be, to kind of follow in Mississippi's footsteps. I think we should outlaw 3Qing in the state, actually.
Right. And I could see if you present it as possibly an option, but even then it I would think should be after a child has learned how to sound out letters and phonetically understand a word. That seems to be so elementary and fundamental. And if you bypass that, then you are left with just guessing. And, those podcasts that you sent me, let's go and remind everybody the name of that so that they can also check it out. What was the name of the podcast?
Yeah, the name of the podcast is called Sold a Story. And you can get it on Apple Podcasts. You can get it on APM. I believe that was the version that I sent you. And then you can also get it on Audible. The APM that I sent you actually has transcripts on it, so you can download those transcripts and be able to go back and refer to the data and the science that they're talking about, and why the science of reading is so important.
Yeah, I thought it was tremendous research, and it was laid out very clearly, very well done. So, I would encourage people to go check out that podcast. Absolutely. It really helped you understand both the 3Qing and the phonetics and the politics behind it. And, we bring it up here on this podcast because of what we're seeing in the state of Oklahoma. And, we just hope, like you said, that politics are not getting in the way of good policy to help our children. And, I would hope that we put the children, their best interest in mind and their ability to learn and raise our academic standards. I mean, there's no way we as a state should be 48th in the nation, and that's what we currently stand at. And the way to get out of that pit is by teaching the kids how to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, as you heard on the podcast, that they talked a lot about the money that's to be made. And I believe Columbia University housed one of the ladies that was very strong in supporting it in the state or in the nation, and a lot of money was made off of the books and the curriculum and the materials. And one of the things that I've said for several years is that if you think about, you get what you pay for, right? And back when, say, Hyundai and Kia first came out with their cars, those were considered like a throwaway car. You drove the wheels off of them, and then, once they died, you didn't pay very much for them, and so it wasn't really worth fixing once it finally broke down, right? And so the whole concept of that getting what you paid for thing, well, I apply that to the curriculum. That if you have good curriculum that is doing the job, that the teachers are using and it's doing the job, then the textbook companies can't get rich off of that, can they? I mean, you think about that, they can't sell.
Is there a reason to buy an updated version, a new version, if what you have is working, right?
That's right. And then you have to think about all of those things that get added to it. There are intervention books, there are computer programs, and there are home connection books that come with that curriculum. And if it's not working, you have to replace those consumables every year, right? But if you're using something that kids are learning how to read, there's no need for after school tutoring for a third or half of the class, because they're learning how to read inside the classroom. So there's a lot of money to be made there, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with the reason why there was a lot of pushback on going to the science of reading, because it does the job.
Well, Representative, thank you for educating us and bringing this to our attention. I think that more people need to be aware of what's happening in the state and what is driving the low outcomes, the low academic outcomes, and the steps that are needed to be taken to shift things and turn things in the opposite direction. And so this is, I think, at the core of it is the way we're teaching our kids to read, the science of reading. And so we'll keep an eye on this Senate Bill 1906 and see how far it gets. And it'd be interesting to do some digging to find out what kind of money is driving it or working to hinder it. So
can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, please do.
So the other thing that I would suggest is that if you have listeners that have kids that are in that kindergarten, first, second grade, kindergarten is considered a pre-emerging reader. And then second grade, second and third are emerging readers because they're still learning to read. Once you get into fourth grade, then you are going to reading to learn. And so prior to fourth grade, you are learning to read. I would highly suggest that parents do their due diligence in checking with their schools. If they have a child that is struggling to learn how to read, that they check with their school and find out whether they're using the 3Qing and the guided reading, or if they're using the science of reading and phonics to teach their kids how to read. And if those schools are not using the phonics programs, they need to be encouraging their administrators to switch over. Of course, telling them, well, if you don't do something different, then we're going to go someplace else, because that's going to be the only way to get to them.
Great advice. And, something that was brought out in the podcast once again is that it was during the pandemic when so many kids went virtual, they were at home, and that's when the parents realized their kids don't know how to read. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit of engagement, involvement on the part of the parent to learn, to see what your kids are learning and how they're learning. And, at what point, Sherrie, should kids be able to read proficiently? I know that varies depending on the level, of reading that they're reading, but second, third, fourth grade, they should be able to pronounce fairly complicated words. And if they come across a word that is they're unfamiliar with, they should have the tools and resources to overcome that, at least by fourth grade, right?
Yes, yeah. They should, by the time they go into fourth grade, they should be proficient readers, and they should be reading on grade level. There's no reason why, coming out of third grade that you shouldn't be reading on grade level. We had the law here in the state of Oklahoma where if you weren't reading proficiently by third grade, then you could be held back. If we would have switched a long time ago to phonics, we wouldn't even have needed that third grade reading law, for the majority of our kids. I mean, if you look at test scores, there's only 32% basically of our kids that are reading on grade level. And that is completely, there is no excuse for that. Not when we have the science of reading and we know what works. And if you think about it, the dyslexia actually started, those numbers started rising. When we stopped using phonics, those numbers of dyslexia started going up. And kids that learn differently, that the phonics, the science of reading, actually attacks that and makes it possible for those kids that are the struggling readers to read better. And those dyslexia numbers have continued to go up as we have moved further and further away from phonics instruction.
Wow. That is another element of this that is so enlightening, because, it seems like those numbers of kids that struggle with dyslexia is only growing, but maybe it's not necessarily those numbers growing. Maybe it's the way we're teaching that is not helping them overcome that, or actually encouraging the problem. So, wow. Thank you, Sherrie.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work you're doing here for the state and for our children.
Yes, you bet. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Great information. We'll be in touch and get some more follow-up on what's happening with Senate Bill 1906.
Sounds good. All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Jake for the State podcast. That was Representative Sherrie Conley. And if you missed any of it, be sure to check out the archive shows, but be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We got more to come. Going to talk to some more candidates coming up. So stay tuned. The Jake for the State podcast. We'll see you.